Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
When you go around different towns around the province lately, you may have noticed the odd sign in a window. It says, under new management. Now, normally when you see those signs, it generally means that the shop's been bought out and the new owners have taken over. But sometimes, under new management simply means that the owner has changed the management of who's running the shop on their behalf. And that's what I want to discuss with you today. Today, we are in the spring festivals season of the church. In other words, next week, it's the church's birthday. So I want to talk to you about that. I want to discuss some of the things that led to a change of managementship in God's household. But before we do that, I want to bring us into one thought. I want to explain, first of all, that the original managementship had been given to Adam. God had arranged for Adam to take over the whole business, to run the whole thing. And we're told this in Genesis, I have put all things under your authority. But Adam lost that. He lost that because of sin. So he disqualified himself, and so doing, he disqualified the entire human race from being able to manage God's property. So God was in a situation, as is revealed by the calling of Abraham, of having to actually manage the business himself. And we know this because we are told about an individual of some standing who Abraham is introduced to, called Melchizedek. He is the king of Salem, king of peace. And we're told in the New Testament that he was without father and without mother, so we look and see him as having divine origins. Now, his priesthood, however, was about to be replaced by the descendants of Abraham. All this is recorded in the first few chapters of Genesis, so we're all familiar with this. So I'm doing a quick summary, if you like. Now, Abraham was told that he was going to inherit the promised land. He was going to be given power and prestige to be the steward of God, and that this would be handed down through a seed from him. Melchizedek blessed Abraham. And Abraham, after he was blessed, began to look to God for this promised seed, this promised son that was to be given through him. And we know that because of that, Abraham had a son called Isaac, and Isaac had two sons, Jacob and Esau. And Jacob, because of the famine, found that his sons, 12 of them and one daughter, all had to move out of that land that God had given them to sojourn in, and they went into Egypt. And in Egypt, they stayed for 450 years approximately. But while they were there, new king came to Egypt. And this new king didn't know anything about Jacob's son Joseph, who had made such inroads within Egypt to actually have saved the entire nation. And you consider the amount of people that would have been alive today. His saving Egypt would have also have saved the entire world from the famine that had come over that 7-year period. So we have to understand these things. We have to take all that on board. This king had forgot about Joseph. He had forgot about all the different things that Joseph would have done for Egypt. And he saw these Hebrews as a slave force. And so he enslaved them. He said, I will use them to benefit Egypt. And this is where we see the start of some of the things that God's about to do. The change of ownership. When Abraham's descendants are about to be given access to authority. Well, we see this as what happens. It starts with a man named Moses. Now Moses, as we all know, we're doing a very quick recap here. Moses, as we all know, was a prince in Egypt. He wasn't born a prince. He was born a Hebrew. He was under the death penalty from the very beginning. But because he was a special child, his parents protected him to the best of their ability, and when they could no longer ensure his safety, they trusted him to God by putting him into a basket which they had sealed, and they put it on the river. And it flowed down past the palace, and the princess saw it, recognized the baby as needing a mother, and she adopted it. So it meant that Moses was brought up in Pharaoh's palace as a son of a Pharaoh. Now, the interesting concept here is he also was being taught his true identity, his true roots, because the milking mother, so to speak, who was being used to feed the baby, the wet nurse, if you like, turned out to be his own mother, because all of this was arranged by God to make this possible. So she instructed and taught her son while he had the best of everything given to him. But in the fullness of time, when he was about 40 years old, Moses began to question his life here in the palace and what was happening to all his people. And he knew there was an expectation on him to deliver the people. But like so many before him, and so many after him, he determined that maybe the best way to do this would be in his own strength. And so he interacted when he saw a guard mistreating some of his fellow Hebrews. And so he struck the guard, and the guard died. So Moses hid the body, but as you do. That's the sort of thing he did. Nobody needed to know. The only witnesses were his Hebrews friends, so they're not going to tell on him, were they? Later on, he found two Hebrews fighting. One of them was one of the individuals that he'd killed. And when he tried to intervene and tell them, "You're brothers, you shouldn't be fighting against each other, you should work together as one unit, as family," they turned to him and said, "Why? Are you going to kill us like you killed that Egyptian?" He knew then he couldn't trust them. He knew then that his life was forfeited. He knew then he couldn't stay. And for the next 40 years, Moses goes into the desert. He becomes a shepherd of sheep, a shepherd for sheep, and looks after his father-in-law's flocks because he marries when he's out there. A Midianite girl. But here's the interesting thing. The first 40 years he had been trained in the palace of a pharaoh how to be a king. And in the second 40 years he was taught how to look after sheep. Bit of a difference, a bit of a conduct. So Moses at this time, at 80 years old, more or less had come to the conclusion that all that had been spoken about him from his mother's influence, shall we say, that he was somebody special and God was opening a door for him to be able to take his people out of slavery, was obviously misdirected. Because at 80 years old, he didn't see himself being able to do anything. But God had different ideas. And we know that in the wilderness, God stopped Abraham with an unusual sign. As he was walking around looking after the sheep and more or less just observing what was going on, he noticed a bush that had caught on fire. It wasn't unusual for bushes to get on fire, but especially in dry seasons. The heat of the sun catches something, it reflects, maybe a small bit of water somewhere has magnified the heat and the bush just goes on fire. So he's seen that before, he's not worried about that. But what catches his attention is that this bush doesn't burn. The fire surrounds it. The fire engulfs it, but the bush is still green. The leaves are not curling up with the heat of the flames. There's no evidence of any damage. And he's fascinated, so he starts to go over to investigate what this is. And as he does, a voice speaks to him. Now we know that when God started to operate and work with Moses, it led to the children of Israel being taken out of Egypt. It was a spectacular show of supernatural power by the divine creator God to prove that he and he alone is the owner of the property, the earth. Management was being removed from the king of Egypt and about to be given to what he would have considered only slaves. But we need to understand, when God actually has the children of Israel in the wilderness, and he brings them to explain his plan for them on their way to the promised land, he decides to lay down certain laws and rules so that they understand how he wants his business run, how he wants them to conduct themselves, how he expects them to become holy as he is holy. It's a very big request that he makes, but he doesn't elaborate it too detailed. He gives it very simple in Exodus, from Exodus 20 to basically Exodus 24. You read, basically, that's the law. That's the whole of the law. Additional concepts of it that we read in Deuteronomy and Levi and all of those things have been added at a later date because of the people's sin and the need to keep them in the wilderness for 40 years. So initially that wasn't the problem. But one of the things that we come across is that God makes a very important statement. Turn with me to Exodus 23 for a moment. Exodus 23. And if my memory serves me right, I think we're looking around chapter 13, or verse 13. Maybe not. Maybe I've got the wrong one. No, I'm looking at the wrong chapter. It's verse 14. Exodus 23, verse 14. God gives the Jews a command. 3 times a year. 3 times a year. You will keep a feast to me in the year. Now, basically, if we were saying that, it means that 3 times in the year, we're going to have a meeting. 3 times, I'm going to call you before me with regard to how your stewardship of what I'm giving you, the authority I'm giving you, is actually going to be done. So 3 times you're going to have a word meeting with me. Basically, that's what God is saying here. 3 times you will meet before me. And this is a command. All the males, now it doesn't say all the Levites, all the males of Israel are to appear, without exception. Now, we know that within the Bible there are more than 3 feasts. But only 3 feasts are specified as having to be before God. Only 3. And we can look at them. The first commemorated at this time the removal of the children of Israel from Egypt by the supernatural intervention of God's death angel. And it's commemorated with the taking of blood of a lamb and putting it on the lintel and the posts of the doors. A special meal that would commemorate forever the work that God had done to free them from Egypt. In our day, we realize that God has moved to the next stage of that particular plan, and he has made that a complete Passover by offering his own Son, the perfect Lamb of God, for all the sins of the world, not to free us from Egypt, but to free us from a worse tyrant, Satan the devil, and from sin and from death. We have been released from that through the blood of Jesus Christ. So God has completed the first feast, the first annual holy day that all have to meet before, completely. It's done. It's complete. The second annual holy day is the one that we're in the season of now. It was called the Feast of Weeks, and it was unique in that what happened at that time, as far as the Jews were concerned, was the actual giving of the law. It was how and when they came face to face with God on the mountain and heard his voice and saw his presence and saw the darkness fall on and the fire burning, and they were terrified. They were absolutely terrified because God himself interacted with them. So we understand the concept here. But this second day, this second feast, has also been fulfilled. Turn with me to Acts 1. Because it's in Acts 1 that we discover, if I can find Acts 1, was here last time, Lord? And we find that the disciples in Acts 1 are actually in an upper room in Jerusalem, and they're there for two reasons. The first reason that they're there is because Jesus has told them, stay in Jerusalem until you receive the Comforter. But the second reason is, as Jews, they are commanded to be present before God on the Feast of Weeks. They have to be there. And this is an interesting concept because they're not exactly happy about being there, because they're aware of information that it's not good for their health to be in Jerusalem at this particular time. Should we put it that way? Yes. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to step back for a minute and I want to explain one other concept here before we go too far into this. Back in Exodus, God chooses to work through a priesthood of people called Levites. And he did this because of a particular action they have made. He has chosen them over all the people of Israel so that they will serve within their generations. But we need to understand that previous to them being set up as stewards of God's household, it was being looked after by God himself. So they are only being put in as servants to care when he's not doing it himself, so to speak. They're only there as servants. And they're only there temporarily until the Son comes to take control again. Now, why am I specifying this? Well, because 2,000 years ago, the Son came. He was revealed in Israel. He was announced by the prophets. He was shown that he was the Son of the living God by all the miraculous things that he did, including many of the original signs that were done when the children of Israel were removed out of Egypt. All these things begin to take place, and people see that. So let's understand a little bit about this coming of Jesus, because it's very, very important when we understand that when the Son comes, the stewardship that originally was there, that had been given charge over the household, no longer had authority. Its authority was being taken back because the owner of the house, the son of the owner, if you prefer, had returned to his property. And as such, it was in his control what he was going to do with it. So, with that in mind, we have to understand that the relationship between Jesus Christ and the religious authorities of his day was not harmonious. It wasn't in harmony. It was acrimonious, shall we say, in more sense than anything else. There was a bitterness there, because while they didn't fully understand what was going on, in the spiritual realm, the priests, the teachers of the law, the high priest especially, the Sanhedrin, who had responsibility for the religious beliefs of the people, all of these things, they were beginning to realize that their authority was challenged. They were being challenged by this upstart. And let's consider, this is what he was to them. This was a 30-year-old individual, hardly out in nappies as far as they were concerned, who started to tell them how they were to worship God. He took what they believed was right, honourable and necessary and turned it on its head. As far as they were concerned, he was a rebel. He was an upstart. He was somebody who would cause them to have the might of the Roman army brought on their heads. And they were under problems from Rome at that time. Of course, he hadn't been first. There was always that other guy. What do you call it? John the Baptist. That's him. He had been a real troublemaker and a priest. I mean, he was of the tribe of Levi, son of a priest. And what's he doing? He's saying everything's about to change. You need to repent. God is going to send us the Messiah. And him you are going to have to listen to because he has authority. He has power. I'm not even worthy to untie his sandals. So, I mean, when a priest begins to tell you this, and remember from the concepts of being a Levite and being son of a priest, John, as the first born son of Zacharias, was next in line for priesthood. He would have automatically stepped into his father's responsibility here to take over the 8th course. And so this was part and parcel of it. It was passed father to son, so on, all the way down the line. This is how the Levites had worked this. So we must understand that John, as far as the establishment is concerned, and as far as the people's concerned, is a priest. But he's also a prophet who has separated himself from the temple and taken himself out into the wilderness, and he has come back into the Jordan area to teach repentance, because someone greater than the temple has come. It's coming, and he's there to reveal it. Now, the religious establishment don't like John. Well, would you like him? They come to see his baptism, they say, brood of vipers, you hypocrites. I mean, he's not exactly trying to attract their attention. He's not trying to get them to like him. He's telling them as it is. In other words, he's saying, you who are the stewardship of the house of God are about to get sacked. That's what he's telling them. He's telling them there is a replacement coming. The son of the household is coming, and he's going to short shift you. Basically, he's going to move you out so quick you won't have time to think about what's going on. So they're aware of his teaching. They're aware of what's going on. They're aware that he is telling them that their time is short. So when he goes into prison now, because he upset the king, they're overjoyed. They think this is the best thing ever. They didn't have to do anything. They didn't have to annoy the people by getting rid of a prophet. He done it himself. He upset the king. He upset the king's wife. That's even worse. I mean, you do that, you could lose your head, and he did. But before he went into prison, he had already identified the Messiah. He identified the one who was to come after him. So, when religious authorities become aware of Jesus' teaching and ministry, they're somewhat perplexed, because this man is totally different from John. This man is speaking with authority. This man is speaking as if he owned the place. The upstart. He owned the place, I think he did, but he was the fun bit. He had this habit of healing people. I mean, all Jews know that there's healing available. There's no problem there. You go to proper procedures, you do the sacrifices, you get anointed, and God in mercy will heal you. There was even a pool that if you could get to it when the angels stirred the water, you would be healed. No problem. So healing was normal. But every so often God would bring a healer into the area who was particularly gifted in this, and some of these healers would go around. We still see them today. There's healers who go around doing different things. But Jesus wasn't like any of them. No. He didn't go through a big ritual and do different things and aspects to get rid of something. He wasn't like the exorcists who operated within the people's who cast out devils using ritual and routine. No. He simply said, "You're sick? Not anymore. We go. That sickness has been brought on by sin. Tell you what, let's get rid of the sin." Sickness goes away. So when you're looking at this, you must look at this from the priest's point of view. If this caught on, they'd be out of job. Because Jesus was telling fishermen and the like, tax collectors, etc., that they should be doing this as well. Then he gave them authority, and they went out and, they started healing people exactly as he started. This could ruin an entire good business. The stewards were getting panicky about this. They knew they had to get rid of it. So we understand what happened. We understand the gospel, why they didn't like Jesus, and we understand what was going on. So when they finally got the opportunity for Jesus' crucifixion, and again they managed to clear the name of that because they got the Romans to do it, they figured that's the end of it. The one sure thing they've always had was when you killed the guy, he couldn't come back to haunt you because ghosts don't exist. Simple as that. So they were kind of surprised to hear that, 3 days later he had resurrected. They were more surprised to hear that at one point, within the next 40-day period, up to 500 of his followers had actually seen him alive. That was a very big witness base. But even worse, those who were feeding them the information that he had risen were in the Sanhedrin themselves. There was evidence that he had risen. Body couldn't be found. He was being seen at different places. There was people who had heard him. It totally bewildered them. They didn't know what to make of it. And then it was quiet. For 10 whole days there's been nothing. Not a thing. Everything's gone quiet. Not even those disciples of his are around. They're hiding somewhere. We're at the day of Pentecost. The year is 340 AD from our count. Some might say 35, but it's probably 340 more likely than anything else. And here is the problem. Here is the big problem. In the Sanhedrin, there is individuals who, unbeknownst to everybody else, have actually been followers of Jesus and have been feeding information to the disciples about what's going on. You say, "Well, I don't know about that. Nothing on that about Matthew, Mark, or Luke." And you're right, there is nothing about that in Matthew, Mark, or Luke, except that we suddenly find that they're able to tell us things that happened in the Sanhedrin Council, which they couldn't know because they weren't there. And then we discover in John, in the Gospel of John, that at night, a member of the Sanhedrin called Nicodemus came to Jesus and said, "We know you are the Messiah, the one sent from God." Now, that's quite a statement. So we're introduced to an individual who previously was hidden from us. And we also know that at Jesus' burial, this same individual brought the spice and the perseverance of the myrrh and all the rest to embalm Jesus' body so that he could be embalmed as a king. So this individual is only mentioned to us by John much, much later. Why? Well, I'm sure we're all familiar with different things that happened previously in, say, World War I or World War II. And some of that information has only come to light now. How there were individuals working in Germany who were double agents. And their job was to literally feed information back. And some of these individuals are only being prosperously looked at now. They're only being looked at now because they're all dead. Because it was that necessary to keep them that secret. And that's exactly what's happening in the New Testament times here. There were individuals who were in positions where they could get themselves into a lot of bother, but they were very useful because they fed a lot of information back into the church. And the reason I'm bringing that out to you is because That's exactly what has happened here. As these disciples are now in the upper room, they're quite concerned because they know that it's the intention of the religious authorities to bring an end, right aligned under the Jewish problem of Jesus. They want this stopped. They want to stop all these followers from having any say whatsoever. And they've decided how they're going to do it. And they know that they're going to do it when they have to show themselves at the Feast of Weeks. They don't have a choice. They know that his disciples will have to show themselves there. Because if they don't, they broke a direct command from God. All males are to appear. Remember? All males are to appear. So they knew if we can just wait until then, when they come out, we've got them. We can take them away. Nobody's going to notice them being taken out. Their leader's gone. They're not going to be a problem. They don't have the power, they don't have the authority, and they don't have the training. They should remember that. No problem. Just whisk them away. It make them disappear. But on Pentecost morning, a strange thing happens. In Acts 2, we read about it. There suddenly came a sound from heaven of a rushing mighty wind. It filled the whole house and where they were sitting, and there appeared to them divided tongues as of fire, and each one it sat on each one of them. And they were all filled with the Holy Spirit, and they began to speak with other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterance. Do you know the interesting thing about this? This is very familiar to what God had originally done when he first gave the law to Israel. There was a wind, there was fire, there was a rush, a sound, there was might and power, and people were terrified. But this time there's no terror. This time there's a total difference. You see, that initial one that we're told about in Exodus is God establishing a caretaker government of his household for a period of time until his son returns, until his son comes. But when the son has come, he now wants to put a permanent management system in place to steward his house until he comes as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Because their position is secure. They will continue after he returns. They're not going to be replaced. So the Levite priesthood is brought to an end. They're no longer required. And so a new set of priests have been given the authority of God to operate. And they're under Melchizedek, that original king who is without beginning. Because it's a far greater priesthood. So you see, God had changed ownership. Not ownership, but management. And he's restored the management now back into his own name, back into his own power. Because each and every one who have accepted Jesus Christ as their personal Lord and Saviour, each and every one of you are brothers and sisters with Jesus. You're not servants. You're brothers and sisters. 3 times a year you're to make to remember. And I've explained that the Jews, from their point of view, felt that because of that, they were sure the disciples were going to be. But God doesn't do anything by half, and he doesn't do anything without having a reason for it. And there was a reason why he wanted to be sure that all the Jews would be in Jerusalem, or as many of the Jews as possible would be in Jerusalem at that time. And so, as we read down here, we find that they were dwelling in Jerusalem, verse 5, chapter 2, Acts. There was dwelling in Jerusalem at that time devout men from every nation under heaven. And when this sound occurred, the multitude came together and were confused, because every man heard them speak in his own language. And they were all amazed and marveled and said to one another, "Look, are all of these who speak not Galileans? How is it that we hear them speak in our own language in which we were born?" in reality, couldn't send everybody from all the world to Jerusalem at that one time. But they all had a meet, so they all went to their synagogues, and they would have celebrated before God on the day, the Feast of Weeks. But each synagogue, right across the known world, would have decided to send representatives of themselves into Jerusalem. And it was a yearly thing. You picked individuals, and they were sent as your representative to Jerusalem, so that in a spiritual sense you were there while you were still remaining at home. We still do today. If there was a lot of people, we send a representative to go to our place, and they come back and feedback what's happening. That's exactly what the process had to come here. And there's a reason why it was important. Because those individuals from every land, every synagogue, right across the whole place, bore witness to the miraculous effect of the birth of the church. They bore witness to it. They heard Peter's inspired sermon. They listened and caught all the information about this Messiah who was crucified and had raised again from the dead. They saw the effect of his preaching and the preaching of the apostles to bring even only just 3,000 people in that day. They saw priests and Levites and Pharisees and Sadducees come and join in the church, into this movement. They saw the growth of the church in the few days that they were there in Jerusalem. And even though they themselves didn't fully understand what was going on, they went back into every single synagogue they had come from, and they taught that message. They said, we saw this. There's this movement in Jerusalem. They're talking about the Messiah having come, having been crucified, and having raised again from the dead. And we saw the power of teaching, of healing, and miraculous things which we cannot explain. And they would have said, and we heard every man speak in their own tongue, though they were speaking Aramaic. We can't explain it. Do you think if somebody came here and told us that, we wouldn't think to ourselves, well, I'd like to find out more about that? And even if it takes 15 to 20 years before a group called Christians start to come into the town and come to the synagogue, and we discover, usually those people, yeah, come and talk to us. We want to find out more about this. We want to understand this. And as we go through the New Testament, as we go through the books and letters of Paul, we discover that's exactly what's happening. As he's going into the synagogues, as he's going there, people already are aware of what's going on. In some cases, it's because the preaching has went a wee bit ahead of them, but in other places, it's because of this seed that was planted back in the day of Pentecost. This seed. And that's what we need to understand. God commanded they would meet 3 times a year so that he could ensure that they could hear the gospel and be prepared for it. He's preparing the field. He made ready the ground so that the gospel could go out and preach and go forth. Today, however, 2,000 years down the line, we have a major problem. No synagogues. I know, yeah, sure, there is synagogues, but I mean, there's no synagogues, not really. We have churches, but we weren't sent to churches. We were sent to preach a gospel about Jesus Christ. We were sent to go where he prepared the place. And the problem is, we don't have that anymore. So we're going to have to do it the way God did it, and prepare by making our voice reach out to anyone and to everyone where God has planted the seed that our voice can water. It's only then that this can work. It's only by realizing that God works in advance for everything that he does. We're a very small group. And every single one of you here could have given this sermon much better than me. But we have an extra little helper here. This extra little helper has absolutely no say in the matter. It does whatever we tell it to do. But it can reach 3.5 billion people. Now, that doesn't mean that 3.5 billion people are going to see this. You might be talking 20, 30, 40, 50. But it has the potential of 3.5 billion people because it makes that possible. God felt that having 2 Jews from every synagogue that went to Jerusalem was enough. That 15, 20 years later, when he brought the gospel into their area, that would have been enough for them to work. I'm suggesting to you that we have a means here by which we can also reach out and continue reaching out. Because the message of Christ hasn't changed from the first generation. It's still the same message. But here's the concern. Over 2,000 years, people have tried to improve the recipe. They've added, subtracted, and taken and pushed things in, and some of those things are poison, destructive to us. It's like when Elisha was called to the prophets, and they made a meal, and somebody accidentally took some wild, well, we think it's sort of like wild mushrooms, it's a sort of plant, but because it was wild, it was poison, and it poisoned the entire thing. And Elisha had to take fine flour and mix it with the stew to remove the poison. It was a miraculous thing done by God. But you are that fine flour. You, here today, are the fine flour of God that he wants to mix in the food that is going out to the church to take away the poison. That's his message to you. And he wants you to know that. Because we are prophetic in that we fulfill all that God has required of us. We obey his Spirit. We obey him. And we continue to have the stewardship of his household until Jesus Christ himself returns. And then we can return back to him.